Okay, so you've just seen a message pop up that this meeting is recorded. We'll record the presentation session part of the session. We'll stop recording the meeting when the networking session will start, so you can be a bit more free with your opinions. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Milda Manometite. I'm the Senior Technical and Policy Manager at the Railway Industry Association, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon session on stations of the future. So we have a nice panel of 5 speakers today who will share their challenges, their woes, and their problems, and they will how to make stations innovative and passenger and user friendly. And after their presentations, we will have a bit of a Q&A session. So if you have any questions to the speakers, you can post them in a chat. I will be encouraging you to raise hand and ask the question in person. So we want to make this interactive engagement. And about 2 o'clock, we will have this post-it note pitch session. So please listen carefully to what the challenges are from the speakers, because we will then bring you to the mural, an online sort of post-it note platform. I will show you how to use it, and we'll post the link to the mural a bit later. And we will just basically encourage you to share your elevator pitch on the post-it note. So if you have a solution to the problem, or if you have an idea, or if you're looking for partners to apply for funding, you can just stick a note there with your contact details and a bit of a sort of a short intro about your idea, and then we will share the outcomes of this discussion with the speakers later. So the speakers will have your contact details and all of your ideas. So this is a good opportunity to start some relationships. Okay, so I would like to now go to the first speaker. So Simon Elliot, Head of Rail Program at Transport for Greater Manchester. So I've just done the kind of introduction. There we go, there's the agenda. And Simon, if you could just pop your camera on, and it's over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me and I'm loud enough, because on the test I think I was a bit quiet. But yeah, thanks for that introduction. It's great to be talking at this event, and there's just a couple of things that I want to share with everybody here in terms of some of the problems that I face locally in Greater Manchester. And the first one is quite a broad issue that we deal with, which is the vision for our railway stations, not just locally but also nationally, and what the purpose of a station needs to be. And that's not just the stations that we currently have in and around the Greater Manchester area, but also considering what the vision for our new stations might be in the future, as Greater Manchester is now on a journey to look at where we want our new stations. And I know, I think Malcolm's on from Network Rail. You know, there's many different versions of visions out there for stations, whether that's the living station vision, but then also what the train operating companies and more locally what the communities might feel the vision is for their stations. And I suppose the thing we need to think about here is very much what the purpose is, depending on whether it's a commuter-based station or it's a larger station that might have greater connectivity to more larger passenger sort of pools, such as the managed stations that Network Rail have. Linked with that vision, I suppose my second point is the role and innovation around devolution. So when we're thinking about what our stations need to be, we need to consider whether devolution is an opportunity or a hindrance. That's quite a sort of thought-provoking statement to make, but we need to be very mindful of how stations are serving the communities that we've got, and we need to be careful that if devolution does come about, I mentioned about a vision for stations, not just locally but nationally, but devolution might start bringing in a very much some stations win and some stations lose, depending on almost a tiered system that devolution might bring. So we need to be careful there, and it's what the innovations around that. We also need to think about one of the problems that we face in Greater Manchester is stations are an inherited asset from a very different era. Some stations are in the wrong place. I remember being at an event previously, and someone said, well, you know, stations, yes, they might not necessarily be very much nested in the communities that they serve, but there's a reason why they're not, and that's because stations are right next to the railway tracks that weren't originally built where these communities are. So what's the innovations that we can bring around using these assets that are very old in some cases, to make sure that we can bring them up to the 21st century and the fit for purpose for both the communities and the passengers that they serve. I know we've got, I think Doug is one of the speakers today, and I know something that he'll probably talk about very much is accessibility. And again, linking back to that problem statement of these stations that we're dealing with very old, our stations in many locations are not fit for purpose for the demographics of our population. And they do lack in a lot of respects full accessibility and inclusivity environment, which we would expect on some of our more modern transport networks that we have, Metrolink in Greater Manchester being an example. Inclusion is another area that we have a problem. So it's not just about direct accessibility, but it's inclusion for many of the other disabilities that we need to take account for on our station assets. Something that's a great passion of mine is integration. So how can we integrate you know, across the UK with our other local public transport and active travel modes as well into the stations, so the communities can get there. The first and last mile has always been a difficult thing to deal with, and what's the innovations that we can bring around making sure people are not driving to our stations but actually using other more sustainable modes of transport. And then the last one, just to bring all this into stark contrast, is what's the innovation around funding? How are we going to fund the investment in our stations to make sure they are inclusive, they are integrated, they are accessible, and also they are fit for the digital and the changing environment that we're dealing with. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Simon. And if we could just move, you had a couple slides, we didn't use them. There we go. We will share the slides with you later. So, but now can we move to Paul from Northern Trains? Paul, over to you.
Hi, I'm Paul Milnes, the Station Development Manager for Northern Trains. So I largely get involved in the commercial side of our property. So that tends to be tenants on stations, the advertising contract and car park strategy, etc. So on the first slide, I've just set out our strategy, which is obviously in the short term, we're looking to support the current tenants that we've got. We will continue attracting big brands. That's a big one for us, increasing the brands that we've got, changing them over from the sort of tired and dated ones that have been there under protected tenancies for a while. We love getting more independents on. We've got some great independents on the stations. Vending is a big area for us. Lots of innovative vending now. Amazon lockers are doing really well, but there's also sort of different types of vending that you can get on, hot food, and our stations do tend to lend themselves to that sort of offer, given that they won't always support commercial tenants. Pop-ups and markets, again, is one that we're keen to drive. We've just signed up to a new contract with an agent for that, and post-COVID, we think that will do really well for us. Today, I just wanted to focus a bit on the destination station and a specific area of that. So destination station is our strategy. We want to sort of turn our stations into valuable community services and bring different types of offers to the stations. As you can see there, the walk-in centre, but we think there's a place. We've got a couple of nurseries at the moment. They do really well. Post offices should be on rail stations, maybe libraries, other sorts of services. Whereas today, I just wanted to focus on a new strategy, which is just moving on to the next slide. We're keen to put co-working space on rail stations. Are you okay to move on to the next one? There we go. Yeah, we're keen to put co-working space on rail stations. We think that this is going to be something that again, post-COVID, that people have changed the way that they work. And on the larger stations, that there is and will be a need for maybe not sitting in coffee shops doing meetings, but now when we're doing these team calls, people will want space where they can go and make a private call or even meet at stations, and sort of agile and flexible space where they can do the daily grind sort of thing before, either if they're catching the train or maybe they're not even catching the train, it's just a location that they'd like to go. We've got underutilized space on stations, whether that be, excuse me, vacant rooms or whether it be a space on the largest stations on a concourse. Keen to improve the digital strategy, fibre links on stations and getting Wi-Fi on stations to a better degree, 5G. Any other technologies, we're keen to build that into the workplace. And obviously we'd love to get third parties involved to sponsor this and help drive it. I put a few examples on the right hand side there of the sort of thing that we're thinking of. The Santander Work Cafe, I don't know if anyone's seen that in Leeds, but it's a great place that has everything pretty much. If you're a Santander customer, you can go in, have a coffee. You've got fibre optic Wi-Fi. There's meeting rooms that you can book, but lots of hot desk space. Another couple of examples at airports: the Regis Business Workbox and the Munich Airport meeting cabs. These are facilities that specifically can be booked and you're in them. So the challenge for us, if we could just move on to the next slide. Obviously, rail stations aren't airports, so it is a different customer. It's a different type of offer. It's a different challenges that we're working with. The commerciality is one. How do we make the facilities maybe self-funding? How do we make them appealing to third-party investors? How do we monetize that for people? Again, back to the digital opportunities. Is there an opportunity to use digital innovation? Could we maybe promote brands and tie in with different brands? So some sort of sponsorship. I mentioned about 5G and fiber links, etc. Could we do that with some of our stations? Couple of challenges around, obviously, security. Security on rail stations is as high profile as airports, but it's a different beast that we're dealing with. Airports are far more secure than rail stations, so we'd need these facilities to be closely managed. And again, we could do with some assistance in doing that and making sure antisocial behaviour, vandalism, etc., that we can manage it on that aspect. The booking process for it is a challenge. Would it be something that people book in advance? Probably yes for the meeting room option. Access to it. How big are we gonna make these facilities, and how many people would we allow in them? So is it a free for all, or is it like a first class loungy type thing where people can just rock up and use it? And the last one there is it just for rail users, or again, going back to the destination station, is it for everyone? Is this a facility that we want to use on station that everyone's got access to? And again, it lifts our footfall levels and brings more people to that station. Again, going back to the community services and embedding it within the community. And that's about it, really. So I'd just be really keen to get some feedback from people just on what sort of innovation we could do to help deliver that. And we're looking to get the working spaces in pretty much ASAP this year. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. It is a very similar model to the airport sort of the commercial spaces and what the airports are today as a destination in itself almost. And the non-aeronautical revenue from these types of activities takes a big chunk of the total revenue for airports. So that's something for railways to think about as well. We would like now to move to Doug, an independent disability rights activist. Doug, if you, we have Malcolm on the slide here. Okay, Malcolm, over to you then. We'll ask Doug to come in a bit later.
Okay, fabulous. Yeah, if you could move to the next slide. I've only got one, so that's helpful. Fabulous. So yeah, I'm Malcolm Pitt. I'm National Head of Station Strategy and Delivery for Network Run. If you can make out the station in the background, and better still tell me which one it is, I'll be very impressed. But as we work to build back better, as we hopefully soon start the road to recovery from COVID, there are a couple of things that we're sure of. Firstly, that customers will expect more from us than they ever have before. And secondly, given the economic landscape that we face, we've got to consider, make the case for and prioritise our spend more carefully than ever before too. And we will undoubtedly be expected to deliver greater efficiency. So I've included on the slide some of the areas of focus for us, and I've been purposefully vague so as not to constrain the creativity and thinking of the people on here and elsewhere. But there's certainly some of the areas where we see innovation having a really key role to play. As the words on the bottom of the slides suggest, value for money is more important than ever. But in our desire to put passengers first, so is our desire to move faster, to be more agile, and to innovate quickly. So reduce those cycle times for innovation, to test things and work out whether they work and we can roll them out, or whether they don't, and we can close those down quickly and learn from those as well. So I'll describe some of these areas a little bit more. On insights and engagement, how we learn more about our passengers, what they want, how we translate that into actionable intelligence to amend our service offer and delivery, as well as improving how we directly engage with them, is going to be really important for us. On improving interchange, so more importantly than ever, given that younger adults have a lower propensity for car ownership than for a long time, how well rail relates to other modes, and also actively grows the extent of active travel, as Simon said, to and from the station is really important. And innovation that improves that synergy and the effectiveness in the connection at some of the stations. However that comes about, we're really keen to explore that. How we use innovation to improve safety at stations, so whether that's behavioural nudging, technology application, or fundamentally in the way that we engage with passengers, is one of our core areas of focus as well. On sustainability performance, so we've recently published our environmental sustainability strategy, and that's a core priority for us all, I'm sure, sustainability now. That focuses on low emission railway, resilience to climate change, improved biodiversity, and reduced waste as well. And in it, we reference some areas and stations, but I'm sure, we're sure that there's many more ways in which to enhance and lever the role that they have to play in the societal change that has to happen now. On measuring accessibility, there's no clear and I would say easy way to understand and measure exactly how accessible stations are. Yes, we can count how many footbridges there are, how many lifts there are, but accessibility is a bit more nuanced than the quite crude measures that we perhaps use nowadays. So being able to measure more effectively and using that measurement to drive improvement and increase the accuracy of our understanding will be a really powerful tool on the road to recovery. Our station stewardship, as we continue to evolve from a more reactive patch and mend approach to one where we consider how our interventions impact some of the other areas on here that we discussed, like safety, passenger satisfaction, sustainability. That's one of our priorities as well. And enhanced tools to enable better surveying, better oversight of the estate is no doubt an area of focus for innovation, with lots of scope there. With stations playing such an important role in the community, so developing tools and approaches that help us engage better, help us capture the impact that we're able to have on the success of those communities and enrich our understanding of what they need, and vice versa, is an incredibly important area. And closely linked to that is the impact we're able to have and the contribution we're able to make by way of social value to the people and places that the railway serves. So measurement of that, finding more effective ways to embed that into what we do and our decision making on a day-to-day basis is an area that's ripe for exploration. And finally, we place significant focus right now today on how we improve access for those that face difficulty in using the railway today. But there's no doubt that it's an area that we can do so much more on. But that ties in perfectly to our burning platform, which is the need to not only attract people to return to the railway, but to attract new users as well, that will fuel the growth and the prosperity of the industry and ultimately the country as well. So I'll probably leave it there, and I'll pass on to the next speaker, because I'm sure we've got lots to get through, and look forward to the discussion. Thank
you, Malcolm. Thank you. It's on a good. You finished on a good note there. Improving access. We've talked about it earlier today, and Doug from Transport for All, I'm sure will cover as well. So it's very good to hear that everybody is very passionate of creating an inclusive railway and improving access to people who need a bit more help, but that in turn improves it for all users. So Doug, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much for asking me to speak. I'm thinking of talking about two things here. If we could move on to the first slide, please. The first slide is about information about accessibility. And I consider that it is as much a barrier as some of the physical barriers and other barriers that disabled people face, where access information isn't up to date or accurate. It can be difficult to determine sometimes what the actual physical accessibility of a station may be. And I'm not just talking about step-free access or otherwise, a number of other metrics as well. So I did a piece of research where I compared the information about stations as is held in Knowledge Base, which is the system that which provides the information for national rail inquiries and for train operating companies' websites, against the same information that train operating companies have published in their what was Disabled People's Protection Policy and is now Accessible Travel Policy, always swapping over to them. And of course, they should be the same information, given that they are both, unless there's an out-of-date problem, that the Disabled People's Protection Policy was written a few years ago and things have changed. In the main, the information should be the same across the two. But sadly, it very much isn't. It feels like a bit of an academic exercise to a certain extent, looking at this. However, it has real problems on the ground. And the Office for Rail and Road recognised this some 3 years ago when they wrote a consultation, which they said that many assistance bookings, as I say on my slide, were designed to fail from the outset due to inaccurate station information. And they reported struggles by booking staff, assistance booking staff, station staff, and customers as a result. And I've experienced these problems myself multiple times when attempting to book assistance, when attempting to determine whether a planned journey was actually possible or not. Some of the differences are quite kind of staggering. I mean, the National Rail Inquiry says that every station in the country has hearing loops for people with hearing impairments to tune into station announcements and to buy tickets using their hearing aids. Whereas in fact, the Disabled People's Protection Policy and Accessible Travel Policy say that only 45% of stations have. And that may sound like it's an inconvenience at best, but as somebody with hearing difficulties and knowing lots of other people with such, if there's not the relevant station information, that can be very scary and very difficult. You can't hear platform changes, you don't know if things are being delayed. It can be a major problem. Some of the problem is built into the infrastructure that's used to present or provide this information. For example, National Rail Inquiries has 4 categories for step-free access of stations. They say it can be the whole station is step-free, all platforms, partial station, or no part of station. However, somehow something in the database has been changed such that it's only allowed to be set at the whole station has got step-free access, or no part of the station has got step-free access. There's no option anymore for all platforms or partial station within the database that feeds National Rail inquiries and all train operating companies' website. Current estimate is that they intend to fix that at the end of 2022. So it does create massive problems for disabled people. And I think that one way that innovation and bringing back better could make a major difference in accessibility for disabled people is if there was a process to ensure that this information was accurately surveyed and portrayed in the first place and kept up to date. I mean, in theory, that is required to be done. Another problem is definitions. Do you define a station that has a ramp that is more than 1 in 12 as having step-free access? Well, technically, it doesn't have a step in that you can get to all platforms without using a step, but some wheelchair users might find it difficult or impossible. So some train operating companies have one definition of that. So other train operating companies have a different definition, and it's their own definition that defines what they put in national rail inquiries and in published information. We need some kind of national clear standard for a lot of these demographic stations, if you like. So that's my first half. The second half, I need to talk about level boarding, please. The next slide, please. Sometimes I feel that we need somewhat of a paradigm shift in our expectations as to what is possible. There's a difference between level access, step-free access to the platform, and step-free access onto the actual train. And this makes a massive difference for disabled people, but it also makes a massive difference for a lot of other people too. Platform train interface injuries, roughly equivalent to 23 fatalities per year, 48% of the total passenger fatality risk on the mainline railway network, according to the RSSB, and it isn't falling. Whilst only a minority of those relate to actually getting on and off a train, that is still a significant number. There is a problem with legacy platforms, legacy stock. We need to do quite a lot, I feel, to achieve level boarding. However, it is such an important thing, and that I feel that we should be starting to embrace making this happen. You know, it can improve disabled people's independence, safety, other people's independence, safety. That it's, whilst there is this legacy, I feel that that should not prevent us from starting to look at how to enable level boarding. And it happens in some parts of the network. It happens on light rail, it happens on in Liverpool in the Merseyrail, and it happens on bits of Greater Anglia and on Heathrow Express. So we've proven that it can be possible. There are technical challenges to it, and there are also infrastructure and cost challenges, but it is such an important project, I think that we need to move forward with it. And that's with a rolling platform of improving platforms, and also a rolling platform of only procuring low floor rolling stock to a standard specification, and that could make a major difference to disabled people and other passengers too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doug. Listening to the presentations this week, it seems that, you know, our innovation for the future is a very simple ask: just make the stations accessible and information accurate. So we're not expecting flying sort of robots any day yet, but it's interesting and eye-opening stuff. And we will move on to the last panelist today, Andy from Siemens Mobility. So Andy, you will give us some interesting digital innovation visions.
I hope so. Thank you, and thank you to the previous speakers. Actually, it's a theme I've got myself in the last couple of days, is listening to people and the likes of Doug and Gavin and others who have just highlighted to me actually what access is and what accessibility is, and actually that's really changed my thoughts on this over the last sort of few days. But my name's Andy Woods. I'm from Siemens Mobility. I work across our portfolio of everything we do, and one of the things that we've come to realize is if we're going to build back a new railway, it's got to be ready for people, and it's got to be better, and it's got to be focused on the passenger and improving that journey. And we think the station's a key part of that. And when COVID first happened, we thought about how do we respond to this and what can we do? And we actually boiled it down to what we thought was the 4 C's, which were communication, choice, control, continuous improvement, and that leads to people having confidence in coming back. So the question is, how do we do this? So we go to the next slide, please. I can skip that one. So this is our vision of the station in the future, and it's all very white and very simple, because actually for us it's about for me it's about connectivity. Actually, how do we get information about that station to people where they need it? So when I hear Doug's story and stories from other users, actually, how do we improve things? So the way we're looking at this is actually, what can the innovative community around us help us with? And that's identifying where people are in the station. Actually, where are they? What are they doing? And what do they need from the station? Actually, how does the station need to change to support them and give them what they need to move through the railway? And then also, how can we give people information in new ways? Because it can't always be the smartphone. Not everybody is happy using a smartphone or is able to use a smartphone. And also, it can't always be screens, because actually screens can break you from being aware of what's going on around you. So sometimes it's actually more about minor clues and changes which affect the way people behave. But actually it enables us to move people around the station in a better way, or give them information they need and clues about where they need to be to do what they do. So I sit here and say, right, I'm Andy Woods, I'm from Siemens Mobility, what can we do? And actually, railway expertise, we have been, as the company I work for, has been working on the UK railways for over 120 years. We know the railway really well. We've got a vast portfolio of stuff. So we talk about station management. We've got systems that manage stations in Crossrail and other major railways. We have got technologies which allow people to plan journeys in new and innovative ways. We've got ways of providing tickets. We've got ways of providing accessible gates and entries into the station in a safe, secure manner. We obviously have the rolling stock division as well, where people are on the trains. So what we're looking at is, how can we bring this whole journey together digitally to improve it? So we can give you that expertise about what else we can add to your device or your innovation to bring it as part of this whole ecosystem. And then we can deliver at scale. We deliver hundreds of millions of pounds of work every year, and we deliver tens of millions of pounds of work across railway stations. So actually we're able to do that. And back to, as I said a minute ago, it's all about integration of data and systems to create that seamless experience that people want. Because actually what you don't want is 2 dozen apps, depending on which station you're at, to access the gate, or a different app to access another thing. So actually it's about having that ability to have a single system that works no matter where you're on the railway. And that's our vision. And that's what we'd like to build, is that digitally accessible station. So it's a station that responds to the needs of the user in a way that hopefully, because of all the clever logic going on, you don't realize anything's happened. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Andy. So we're now, we've been receiving some questions from you, and we can stop sharing the slides now and bring everybody back in on the screen. I think I'll just remove the spotlight as well. Okay. So we have some questions come in, and I'll read up some of those. But in the meantime, if you would like to ask a question, raise your hand. I think there's a function that you can raise a hand. I will try and look, if you can't find the button, I will try and look at your faces and see if you're doing this, waving your hands. So I'll try and bring you in. And to kick off then the discussion, as I mentioned, there has been a lot of talk about access and providing information, and there were a couple of things that were brought, the measuring accessibility and what accessibility is. And there was a question to Doug, but I think actually the question maybe is to our Network Rail colleagues. I don't know whether there's any more on the call, but is there an opportunity to include these as a prerequisite for the new Network Rail contracts? And that could be part of the compliance requirements. So Doug, maybe you can come in first.
That sounds like an excellent suggestion, and thank you for it. And I'll pass it on to various activists and such as myself. Thank you.
And Malcolm, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly an opportunity for that to feature in that. The important thing is that it's part of a clear, wider strategy, so that you don't end up with, what some of the things that we've seen in the past, where you end up with fragmented standards, and 1 or 2 of those have been described on the call today. So yeah, absolutely, that's a potential vehicle to address issues, but there's got to be an overarching strategy.
And don't mute yourself, Malcolm. There's another question for you. What mechanisms are there available for testing innovations at Network Rail stations, and how do we apply to those?
So we have an innovation team that are responsible for administering the sort of first of a kind submissions in Network Rail and engaging the different parts of Network Rail that need to make those happen. So we've got examples of having run innovation trials at stations, at the bigger stations recently, even during COVID and the challenges that we faced around that. But we've also got other opportunities. So through the development of some of our rail testing and innovation centres that give the chance to test equipment in similar conditions, but outside of the live railway, which also offers sometimes faster ability to get in, test things and start the journey towards the sign-offs and approval required for rollout across the network. So I think there's lots of opportunities if we're addressing the problems that that need to be addressed.
Thank you. I guess there's also a question to Andy, but also other speakers as well that have the ability. How do SMEs engage with you? Is it just sending you an email, or is there a process? What's the best way?
For me, yeah, to be honest, one of the first things I did on this whole sort of conference and event was I went through the list of all the people, and I've highlighted those who I want to speak to. And Mohammed at Route Connect, Mohammed, sorry, terrible for not mentioning the name of your company there, but yes, I'm going to reach out to you guys and hopefully connect you in with the other parts of our organization. We're a big organization, so it's going to take us a little bit of time. When maybe not going on the phone to you today, it may be over the next few weeks, but we'll be in touch. So yeah, I've got your message. I've got your email. I'll be in touch. And yeah, just talk to us. Just get hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn. Drop me an email here. Grab my details, and I'm always happy to listen to people. I can't guarantee we'll do anything today, but we'll try and do something in the future. We've already built some really good relationships with SMEs through the RIA conferences and organizations. So this is a really great model that we think works really well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that praise. I will take it. Paul, how many sort of innovations you've already implemented in your stations, and also how much freedom do you have to innovate within the stations?
Well, speaking personally, I think obviously, as I said, ours is more about the commercial element. So I think we were definitely the first TOC to put 100 Amazon lockers on stations, and that to us was innovation, because it as Malcolm will testify, there is a lot of bureaucracy to get through to deliver a lot of these things on the railway, and that does sort of inhibit us a lot of the time. But so I would call that innovation. More about innovation is maybe advertising and being able to use different formats for advertising on old and listed buildings. I think things like wraps, station dominations, train wraps as well are really difficult to deliver. Great formats for bringing in income, but again, yeah, we see that as innovation because it's a real challenge for us on the railway.
Okay, thank you. And I've got a question to Simon. There was a very first one. Promote and develop Plus Bus as part of Transport for Greater Manchester. What do you have to say to that, Simon?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point that's been raised there. I don't know if it was Ian, sorry, I was looking at it before. Yeah, the first and last mile, as I mentioned in my sort of opening discussion, is a huge challenge for us. And it's kind of linked to the devolution question that I asked, because Manchester is on a trajectory to look at potential franchising options from our bus network. I think we all are acutely aware that linking our stations, whether that's active travel or other modes of transport, Outside of London, there's always been a challenge. And this is just my personal view, not necessarily one of TFGM, but you know, is devolution the answer to that? I think the jury's out. I think there's definitely a part to play in making sure local decisions are supported by the local communities. But the mechanisms in which we do that, I think there's a raft of innovation that can be done to deliver it. Plus and ticketing solutions is definitely something that we look at day in, day out in TFGM as part of our raison d'etre. And that's actually more acute in the world. I hate to raise it, but COVID, we've got to move people back onto public transport. We've lost a lot of people to the car because the road networks have been less congested, and making sure that people get back out of the car and come and use the public transport is going to be key. And the other thing, stations, you know, are going to be the first thing that will welcome these people back. So what are we doing to make sure that they're a good environment, to make sure that people stay using public transport and they don't go, you know what, I'll use my car. So Paul mentioned security, really important. What's the innovations that we're doing around that to help and promote active travel? You know, how are we making sure that people want to store their bikes at stations to promote active travel and promote that first and last mile on active modes, all that sort of stuff. There's huge areas of innovation. And someone mentioned how can we get our innovations on these stations. I think stations are a safe place, actually, from a rail perspective. Train and platform interfaces are a dangerous place. Doug mentioned, I think, the 13 fatalities a year. But a lot of the innovation that we're talking about here is not necessarily at that phase. So why can't we just get these things tested and trialed on our stations as quick as possible? And I know Malcolm mentioned, you know, the industry is trying to make that more accessible and quicker. And obviously that's something that I welcome. And I know Paul, as a talk, you know, Northern would want to try and grease the wheels and make sure we can do this a lot quicker than we perhaps historically do in the industry.
Thank you very much, Simon. Andy, you have your hand up. Want to contribute?
I was going to ask Simon about mobility as a service and whether.
Oh, good, because there is a question about it as well in the chat.
Indeed, yeah. Gavin just came up at the same time. That's why I raised my hand. Was obviously, do we need to move away from the idea of bucking from station to station and start thinking about actually how do we bring in innovative new other transport mechanisms? I don't know if people come across some ideas like demand responsive transport, which is kind of a bus taxi hybrid. Obviously, we've got micro mobility, you know, the scooters and the bikes, which are currently coming under trial in various places. Actually, do we need to start thinking about how we integrate all these together in a large area to provide a journey? So I can basically, I think, as Gavin said, I can plan the journey from my sofa and know step by step how I'm going to get there by a single ticket and get to my hotel sofa in a comfortable way. And actually, it goes beyond just being from Bristol Temple Meads to Manchester Piccadilly, but from Wick Crescent to Beetham Tower in Manchester in the Hilton there. That'd be ideal. In fact, room 43A or whatever.
We now know your hotel choices. Amazing. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to come in on that?
I can quickly come in, and I will keep it very brief because Andy's absolutely right to raise mobility of the service, but that is such a huge area. I don't even know where to perhaps begin. You mentioned ticketing, the fact that we've got 54 million ticketing types in the rail industry. How can we promote that end-to-end ticketing solution that, to be honest with you, is the first access point for most people to plan their journey? Doug mentioned information. All decisions are built on information. If the information's poor, we make the wrong decisions, or the decisions that we make are then a barrier. The stations, it's not just how you access a platform. They need to be, from a mobility service, parking, EV points, scooters. You mentioned we're doing first trials in Greater Manchester for e-scooters. You know, bikes. huge subject, but it's definitely something that's rallying everybody around answering some of them really difficult questions. And all I will say is that let's just come up with some of this and get it out there as soon as possible.
I think Simon's right. I think it's not a technology problem. And I'm going to toot our own horn a little bit here, but if you go to Denmark, we've got a Siemens-based mobility as a service platform where we actually integrate all these things. So you travel anywhere in Denmark and you can go door to door and we'll plan it out for you. And that is across all sorts of mobilities. We do similar in the UAE as well, I think. So it is fundamentally a decision to do it from solving all these problems about getting the data, getting the information and getting the ticketing sorted out right. So it's not so painful.
Joe, just on the last point on that, because it's interesting you talk about the integrations actually key there. We've just got to be careful locally, and this is why I come back to the devolution issue. You can create mobility inequality, and we've got to be really careful of that. So that's a responsibility of us, many people on this call, to make sure that we're balancing that through and we're not creating a bigger problem elsewhere.
And Gavin, you had your hand up.
I totally understand what Simon was saying about.
Gavin, can you just introduce yourself to the people who don't know you?
Gavin Neat. I've got an app a system called Welcome, which helps customer service teams give better customer service to disabled people. And it's a very small company, but it's a very, very big solution. But Simon pointed out there, when you try and think of, it's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? If you try and eat the entire elephant at once, you're never going to manage it. And I think it's really quite scary when you think about all the things, certainly from what we've seen in rail, trying to do everything together, ticketing on top of customer service, on top of access, on top of it's just impossible to do, which is why it's really important for the SMEs to be bought into an organization, to have a hub where somebody says, we're not about us fixing the entire problem, but we want a room with 10 people in the room. And what we're actually focusing on is an API. We're focusing on our solution having a way of your solution working with our solution. And that's where we, as the instigator and the pilot of this, is bringing in other people's solutions. And then it's up to the large organizations to find the little solutions that they want to bring in and then help them get APIs in order to actually work within them.
Thank you very much, Gavin. There's various conversations going on in the chat, and that's great. Would anybody like to come in with either comment on the theme that is happening now, or pick up something from the chat, or bring a new point into the... There we go, Ian, you have your actual hand up.
A question for Andy Woods. What use has been made of what 3 words for start and end of journey times, if any?
That's a good question, Ian. I'm going to hand up and say we actually use what 3 words internally for locating things like access points and locations on the railway. So actually it's now standard within our organization for our delivery teams to have things like access points with what 3 words. So actually it's a great product that is being used. For actually journey planning, we haven't yet. I've noticed actually what 3 words is starting to get quite a lot of traction in society at large, actually. I believe it was sort of referenced on Casualty the other night or last weekend. And that to me is actually that point of, you know what, this is a system that's really starting to get traction. So yes, definitely, we need to get an opportunity and then see how we can start to make this happen, actually, to create that new way of people planning that journey point to point. That's a really good point. Again, does that answer your question, Ian?
And then there's
somewhat.
See, don't ever ask questions you don't want to hear answers for, Andy. Darren had a finger up. Darren.
Yeah, hi. I wondered if there's a way of transposing some of the requirements from trains and the best practice back into stations. So if you look at the PRM toilets on the trains, they have a visual contrast requirement. So, for example, the toilet seat should be a contrasting colour to the floor and the wall behind. And that's for visually impaired passengers. Now, if you look in the stations, you've got these change in places toilets, which are great, but they're white on white. So they're sort of missing, there's a disconnect in some of the things that we input through, but some of that best practice could quite easily be rolled across into stations. or the other way around. There might be things from the station side that can go into the trains.
I think Doug wanted to come into that on that, and then Malcolm, I see you unmuted yourself. So Doug.
It's a good point. I guess the problem is the proliferation of standards and the origins of said standards. And PRM TSI was European, but then there's also the design standards, which is our code of practice, and then there's the Part M of the building regulations and approved document.
But don't they all come from primary legislation? There should be a disconnect, you know, a point where they all meet.
I think it would be a good thing if they did all meet, and I completely agree with you. And it would be great to try and make that happen. I guess that I'm one of these negative people that can always see the difficulties in making things happen. But as I say myself, that shouldn't let us stop trying to make things change. So yeah, I agree with you, basically.
Okay, I think Malcolm, you wanted to come in, I don't know, and then I see Keith, then we'll come to Keith.
Yeah, we've actually, so our professional buildings and architecture team have actually, they're currently working through republishing the industry design standards suite, which has got itself into a bit of state over several years, since sort of BR had an all-encompassing design standard suite. So they're methodically going through all of the different standards, rationalizing. There's some cases where old standards, there's a question mark as to whether they do or don't apply, because nobody's ever said that they don't anymore. So they're doing a really good piece of work at the moment. And I know that they've just published a new toilet design standard. So whilst I have read it, I'm frantically trying to remember whether that specific point was picked up. But I know it was a really thorough job that they did. And they've cross-checked it against all the different pieces of legislation and standards. So I'm going to go and reread it to see if they've dealt with that point specifically in there, because whilst it won't solve all the issues today, it does mean that people will utilise it to start to correct some of these issues as they're going in and investing and delivering schemes.
Could I get a copy of that? One of the not the issues, one of the things I found with the PRM standard for trains is, although you've got a contrast requirement, if someone's got dementia and they start losing their sight, the first colour that goes is white, and then the last colour that goes is red. Now, in some of the trains, things have been signed off with white seats, but they've got a contrasting floor and background. But that then doesn't help dementia patients, for example. So it's how to, you know, tease in those other bits of information about, you know, what contributes those disabilities.
So Malcolm, if you can share, please do. And Keith, you wanted to say something? You just don't forget to unmute yourself.
Do this. Am I live now?
Yes, you are.
Hello everyone. So for a short period of time, I sat on the British Standards Committee 8300 parts 1 and 2. And that is, so we design and manufacture inclusive design ticket offices. One of the big frustrations that we experience in the rail sector is that projects get signed off wrong right from the outset. And a lot of that's to do with, there's so much influence of the contractors. So a lot of the talks, Network Rail pass a lot of the projects onto contractors. And a lot of those projects get designed wrong from the outset, but there's absolutely no reference on a lot of the time to British Standards 8300 parts 1 and 2, which underpin a lot of the standards that you've been talking about, PRM, TSI, if that still maintains, as we've left the European Union now. But a lot of architects, designers are not aware of that standard, and it is all geared up around access to buildings and navigation in buildings, color contrast, people with hearing impairments, visual impairments. And my recommendation to a lot of our customers when we approach these projects, just look at the standards, and that then links back to the Equality Act. It's quite simple. I don't know if that helps one of the questions which Doug was talking about.
Doug is nodding.
Yeah, I love the BS 8300 and quote it all the time. It's a fantastic document, and I wish that more people used it.
Fantastic. So we have about 5 more minutes left until the panel discussion will not go ends. We're not going anywhere. We're staying here in this room. So if you have any last question, You can just unmute yourself and speak. Okay, no questions. So then I will, please participate in the chat. There's lots of interesting stuff going on there. What I'm going to do now, I'll share my screen real quick with you, and we'll explain what we're going to do with the mural. So here you see the mural that you will see a link pop in the chat very soon. But what we would like you to do is just